Okay, so we'll soon be going live.
Okay. So let me just put on my status
All
that
right.
will be going live. So just a few minutes.
Mm.
Okay. Good
Okay, so
evening,
now we are
everyone.
live.
Are we live?
Yes, yes, we are now. So sorry. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to another edition of Climate Wednesday, International Climate Change Development Initiative Africa. So today we're here with Mr. Benson Dotun Fasanya, and he is the team lead for Center for Earthwork, CFEW. And today our topic will be restoration of wildlife in the ecosystem. Thank you all so much for joining in, and sorry for the little wait. But yes, thank you so much, Mr. Benson. Over to you. Kindly introduce yourself to our viewers.
Okay. Thank you very much. I'm super excited to be with you, Duro, the Climate Wednesday team. It's actually a real pleasure. I am Benson Dotun Fasanya, as she has rightly said, and I am an activist, a researcher, and a social entrepreneur. Um,
Hmm.
I actually love engaging young people, and so I can call
Hmm.
myself a team coach. So we started Center for Earthworks some years back, and it's an organization, and we are passionate about securing the earth. So that's just basically um, a bit about what I do. I'm also one of the network members of the network of Nigerian facilitators. We're a group of young people working using the tool of dialogue to promote peace. And of course, my key thematic have been trying to see how environmental conservation and environmental awareness can be used as a tool to actually promote peace. So that's just a little about what we do. So at Center for Earthworks, we have been engaging schools, communities, um, and then of course the online platform through our Youth for Land campaign. Through school, we have been doing what we call the Project Nature, which is a school-based environmental program where we engage young people to talk about how they understand how the natural world works and their role in being frontiers in finding solution to our current environmental crisis. So that's just basically it.
Hmm. Thank you so much. That was a lot to, take in. It's so great to see people out there doing so many wonderful things to help the environment, to help the community, and that is exactly what you're doing. Mr. Benson. Really lovely to have you here with us.
Yes, thank you very, very much.
Yeah, so now we're going to launch ourselves into today's topic. Like I stated earlier, today's topic is restoration of wildlife in the ecosystem. And just to give you a backdrop of why this topic is what we're discussing today is the fact that this month is June, and this month was also celebrated as, June 5th was celebrated as World Environment Day, and World Environment and as such, we're discussing topics that have to do with ecosystem restoration. So now, Mr. Benson, what does ecosystem restoration mean to you, and what can be considered wildlife? Hello, Mr. Benson.
Yes, I'm here with you. Thank you
Yes,
very
so let me
much.
repeat the
Well,
question again. Yeah. Because did you get the question?
okay, you can come again, please.
Okay, so the first leg of the question is, what does ecosystem restoration mean to you?
Okay, thank you very much for that question. I will like to begin by saying ecosystem restoration is a process of facilitating the rejuvenation of our ecosystem. So to further break it down, I will say ecosystem is actually the entire environment which is made up of biotic and abiotic components. The biotic component means the living things. The abiotic means the non-living things. So the living things, of course, include plants and animal, humans. Of course, we are part of the living things. So, of course, other
Yes, we
components
are.
include the our water bodies, the air that we breathe, the temperature, the humidity,
Mm-hmm.
and many other parts of it. So, just like I said, it is restoration, of course, as the word implies, is bringing it back to the original um, standard state where everybody um, enjoy an ecosystem that is at equilibrium. By equilibrium, I mean that is balanced. So,
Yeah.
pardon me, I have to break it down as is as simple as it can be. So
Yes.
for me, at our end, we have this slogan at Center for
Mm-hmm.
Earthworks, and it says, uh, "We work to secure the earth." And for me, in my own understanding, ecosystem restoration is our act of securing the earth.
Yeah. 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 So judging, I'm going from what you stated before, the definition of ecosystem restoration itself. Do you think that a lot has been done as regards restoring our ecosystem?
Yes, a lot of actions are taken either locally or globally, but more needs to be done.
Mm.
Of course, we know we in the past we have parks, we have zoos, we have game reserves, and many, many other across, and many other things have actually encroached. We have the issues of plastic pollution. We have issues with our air pollution. We have issues with erosion, and all these things
Mm-hmm.
are actually um, kind of underlining and then setting us back in the sense that
Mm.
all that has been done, it's actually eroding. And of course, in our own part of the world, a lot of people enjoy bushmeat. I don't know when last you had a taste of one. Uh-huh. And of course, bushmeat has been one of the major depleter of our wildlife.
Mm.
So you discover that okay, a lot needs to be done.
Yeah, it does.
Later, I will share with you what is being done in this part of the country. Of course, we know the National Conservation Foundation, the NCF, and many
Yeah.
other organizations are actually working, but more needs to be done because
Mm.
we cannot afford to lose our wildlife, and our
Yeah.
ecosystem is very, very, very important to us. So
Mm-hmm.
more needs to be done.
Oh, thank you very much, Mr. Benson. So now that leads me to my the second leg of the first question, which is what can we consider as wildlife? Because some people always hear the term wildlife, wildlife, but what does wildlife actually mean? Is it just the lions that we see out there, or it incorporates so much more that people do not know about?
Okay, initially, traditionally, you discover that a lot of people actually, initially, I mean, wildlife only covers animals that we find in the wild. But over time, it has actually evolved to include both plants and animal. In
Yeah.
the scientific term, we call it flora and fauna. Flora, of course, it's the
Yeah.
plants. The fauna are
Mm-hmm.
all the animals, and of course, we know they are different in their species, in their um, taxonomy, and many other. So we have a lot of species. In fact,
Yeah.
if you further go into the conservation world, you hear what the term biodiversity.
Mm-hmm.
Biodiversity, it's actually so deep. It
Yeah.
describes the varieties of form in which life exists.
Mm.
So, just like I said, um, wildlife stands for both our plants and animal that we find all around us.
Okay. Thank you very much. At least now a lot of people will understand what wildlife means, because I know there are so many vague concepts about what exactly does a wildlife entail. So thank you so much for, telling us about it and, explaining to our audience out there what incorporates wildlife. Now moving on to our
Okay,
next
thank
question.
you.
Yeah. Yeah. So, what does wildlife conservation entail, and how can we ensure it is preserved, considering many species are faced with extinction? Because we've got to realize that, because of, anthropogenic pollutions, things like that, a lot of species are going into extinction. So, what is the role of wildlife conservation in this context?
Okay, I would like to say that conservation is an act, and by act, it means, of course, you have to take action to
Mm-hmm.
actually protect um, the wildlife and their habitats.
Mm-hmm.
Habitat means, of course, the places of abode. It's just like your home. One of the key challenges that has been actually affecting our wildlife is the destruction of wildlife habitats. You discover that for these past 3 decades, the rate of deforestation, the rate of biodiversity loss, the rate of poaching, the rate at which we have lost a lot of species have increased. Sometimes it can even be the pollution, just like I've mentioned earlier. And to mention the classic one that we have all around us is the plastic pollution, where
Mm-hmm.
you discover that people use single-use plastic and just dump them.
Yeah.
All this plastic have actually end up sometimes killing all this wildlife in the wild, and sometimes even in our oceans and our seas. You discover that okay, all this pollution that we are actually having or practicing in land is being carried all the way to our seas, affecting various forms of wildlife in the sea. Others, their own is actually through um, killing other animals to just sell their parts. So that's illegal wildlife hunting. Of course, in Africa, you know how elephants have been hunted for their talks. The talks is actually a very, very important traditional relic where
Yeah.
it is being sold at a very, very exorbitant price. So for some people, they see it as gold, and you
Mm-hmm.
see a very huge elephant being killed for one single thing. It
Mm-hmm.
talks. So you discover that conservation is actually supposed to be all inclusive, protecting wildlife. Another thing I would like to mention is the fact that even plants have been, what do you call it now, traffic. For example, here in Plateau State that I am in, there is what we call the rosewood. The rosewood is actually of huge economic value because it has a unique um, uh, application in the furniture industry. So a lot of people are actually harvesting all this rosewood found in Pandam Game Reserve. It's actually a game reserve here located in the plateau where um, there are lots of biodiversity, in fact, animals and plants. So the destruction of these habitats actually lead to the loss of our biodiversity. Um, you also discover that this is actually being um, shipped all the way to China. And after being processed, is brought back to Nigeria. And then a lot of people purchase these important furnitures and items at a very high cost, but not knowing that we are actually doing a lot of damage to our own habitat. Imagine
Yeah.
in the next 10 to 20 years, the Pandam forest, if it's actually completely leveled, what will happen to the wildlife in that um, location? You discover that they have no option than to either move or perish. So, one of the key things we must do when it comes to conservation of wildlife is number one, protection of the habitat. Number two, um, what we call promotion of these biodiversity. For example, a lot of people don't know that there are lots of unique plants and animals in the wild. So when we begin to actually show this important um, natural assets to people and the need to actually protect them, this can actually be through photography, even through ecotourism. So you discover that okay, conservation in its parts is actually very, very holistic. So just like I've mentioned, protection of biodiversity through the protection of their what do you call it now? Reduction in pollution, um, a very high penalty for poachers and illegal trade of wildlife. Another this thing I will also mention is I don't know if you have heard of pangolin.
Mm.
Pangolin is an animal that is a nocturnal animal that is also found in a lot of forests in the West. So pangolin has a lot of medicinal value, and some believe that pangolin has the secret to either cancer or longevity,
Mm.
as in increasing your age. So
Yeah.
pangolin have been hunted and then trade in to many Chinese markets. And of course, this has been one of the major, what do you call it now, endangered species that we have in plants. We call them, one example is the rosewood. In animal, one example, of course, is the pangolin. And these are very, very important to us.
Mm.
So we must work, the government must work to actually uh, enforce laws because the laws are there, but it must be enforced. A person is found with such, he should actually face the consequences. So, um, in a way, there is also the need for monitoring at both local and at international level. Then, of course, uh, part of what we are doing right now is also part of conservation, creating
Mm.
awareness,
Definitely.
both online and offline. So
Yeah.
these are some of the key ways in which conservation is actually taking place because people cannot act on what they don't know. So it is very, very important that we all join hands to actually create this awareness. Another one is education. Environmental education is very, very key. And of course, if we ensure that schools across board actually taught the importance of our environment and the need for actually to conserve our biodiversity and our wildlife, you discover that we have a very, very functional society. Of course, working towards the SDGs. Of course, that's another topic on its own. So
Yeah,
thank you
it
very
is.
much.
Thank you so much. That was so much all in one. It shows that you really know what you're talking about, and a lot of people can benefit so much from just listening to you about wildlife conservation, about the ecosystem restoration that we are speaking about. Thank you so much. And you mentioned something about laws. So that brings me to another question. So you said that we have laws. What laws do we currently have in place that protect the wildlife that we have, or maybe conserve it in one form or the other, be it national or international? And if we have those laws, are they actually being implemented?
Okay, thank you very much for that question. Of course, we have that law. It is called the Nigerian Wildlife Management Policy and Conservation Law. It has been in effect, and of course, the Nigerian government also signed into the international law, which is called CITES. And CITES stands for, I'm coming. Okay, CITES stands for the Convention on the International Trade in Endangered Species, Flora and Fauna. That is CITES. That's the CITES. Of course, Nigeria is one of the signatories to the CITES Convention. Um, of course, we have a lot of environmental agencies. If you can recall, we have NEXRIA, National Environmental Standard and Regulatory Agency, right? We have NEXRIA,
Yeah.
we have Ministry of Environment, we have a lot of even state ministries of environment. We have various departments that deals with climate change, others with, of course, wildlife. We have even the tourism board. So all these agencies and federal government parastatals have working
Mm,
documents, have policies. Even when you go to military or paramilitary agencies like the Nigerian immigration, or Nigerian customs, the National Civil Defense Corps, all have various departments that are supposed to be in charge of what we call the species conservation, because Nigeria is actually a member.
mhm,
But the problem has been that of enforcement and that of monitoring, and then, of course, that of funding.
mm.
The truth is that without funding, a lot of things suffers.
Yeah, yeah, it is.
And in as much as our existence as a country depends upon our unity and our coexistence and our mutual coexistence with nature, you discover that other issues are, what do you call it now, given more priority than. But in the real sense, every um, component of our society, of our environment, is also very, very key. It will interest you to note that, okay, the, what do you call it now, the Lake Chad Basin has been faced with a lot of conflict. Of course, the Boko Haram, and then, of course, the bandits and many others. These, in part of our research, have been linked to environmental degradation and the wildlife lost. Of course, in a quest for existence, man often destroy what he will later need uh, to actually secure his future. So it is very, very important that the government at this point fund wildlife conservation, fund ecotourism, fund all these various parastatals, so that they'll be able to actually fully implement the uh, available laws. And if possible, civil society should begin to advocate and further create awareness of the importance of all the implementation of all these policies. The
Mm,
truth is that a lot of animals are facing extinction, and we should also know that we are all connected. I love some years back, one of the key the biological, uh, the UN Convention on Biological Diversity theme for the year was biodiversity is us. It means that when we begin to lose our biodiversity, we shouldn't think that um, we are going to live a better life. Rather, we're going to face a lot of what we call the zoonotic diseases. Of course, in the recent years, one of the key publications of the United Nations Environment Program was that of the emergence of the zoonotic diseases. Zoonotic diseases means diseases actually introduced to humans through animals. And of course, we have seen the rise of Ebola, the rise and the fall of Ebola. We have seen the rise and the fall of SARS. Even there is this Lassa fever, which is introduced by rats. So you discover that
Yeah.
biodiversity is actually very, very important. The more we degrade, the more we destroy some habitats, the more we introduce pathogens that are affecting us. And of course, we know the recent lockdown that happened last year is still very much impacting other countries, the COVID 19. So, and of course, we can't turn a blind eye on this problem that is currently affecting us. So it is very, very important that governments begin to fund these agencies so that they can fully implement all these laws. It is also very, very important that civil society activists begin to actually mount pressure on the need to actually secure our wildlife. So that's what I can, briefly,
Wow.
that's what I can say to add to
You
this.
said
Thank you.
briefly. Well, that was a lot, and I won't call it brief because you really, spoke about the impact of, how the laws really affect where we're going and where we are currently. And it's something that we always have to take cognizance of wherever we are. And we also understand that so many laws are currently not being implemented. So obviously, going from the laws being in black letter to the laws being implemented is something we have to start doing so that we can get the conservation we actually need. We can restore our ecosystems and ensure that the wildlife is protected. And even during your while you were speaking, you answered also another question of mine, which was because I know a lot of people will be asking what exactly is the correlation between the wildlife and human existence, and which was what you also spoke about when you talked about zoonotic diseases, that diseases caused by animals. So we get to see how our biodiversity, our ecosystems obviously affect us in one way or the other, which is why we have to ensure that we take proper care and ensure that all the laws that are being, like you mentioned, sites on for the international convention. We have another law in Nigeria. We also have to ensure that these
For the
laws
international
are being
convention, we have another law in
implemented
Nigeria. We
in
also have to ensure that these
Nigeria.
laws are being implemented in Nigeria.
So thank you very much, Mr. Benson.
So thank you very much, Mr. Benson. Thank you so much.
Yes, so thank you. So now I'll be going over to
Yes, so
another
thank you. So
question.
now we're going over to another question. Okay, I'm all
Now,
yes.
so
Now,
you spoke
so
about some
you spoke
projects or about some organizations that are currently
about
working on this. Can you
some
give us some
project or
examples that
about some organizations that are currently working on this. Can you give us some examples that okay,
yes, because I'm hearing
of course,
yes, can you give
Nigerian
us some
Conservation
examples about
Foundation.
that?
Yes, so I'm hearing yes. Can you give us an example about that? Okay, is currently working with Aplori and other um, national NGOs on the first step in part of the process of ecosystem restoration. It also include that of first of all erosion control, reforestation, removal of invasive species. Invasive species are actually species that are introduced from another location to another location. That can also cause very serious problem. And
Mm,
if we are to talk about that, we won't even live here today. So what NCF is actually doing with some local NGOs here is the what do you call it now? Formation of nurseries. These nurseries are to actually grow tree seedlings, which is actually distributed to various communities, and these trees are planted. Um, um, Also, there is an institute called Aplori down here in Jos. They are a research center, and they have been doing a lot in bird monitoring and other biodiversity conservation projects. One of my mentors have been working on pangolin projects all across the country.
Okay.
His name is Dr. Babajide Agbola. And then, of course, he has been creating awareness, doing publication on the issue of pangolin conservation. And of course, I uh, must say kudos to him. And of course, various NGOs are working to also bring or highlight the issue of this rosewood trafficking in Jos Plateau State. But one of the key challenges, of course, have been the issue of funding, and then the issue of the media coverage, and then lack of government support as it relates to um, nabbing all the criminals involved in this illegal trafficking. So
Yeah.
there are a lot of projects going here and there, but there is serious need for synergies so as to have more impact across border.
Okay. So focusing on your own organization, the organization that you're a team lead for, do you have any project concerning wildlife conservation or ecosystem restoration itself?
Yes, what we have been doing, like I've mentioned earlier, we have been engaging schools to teach young people how they can actually be frontiers in actually solving this problem. So part of the campaigns we do is tree planting in various schools, and we are working to see to achieve one of the first green schools in Nigeria. Besides that, we also work with communities. We have been doing the Tree for Life um, project. We have been engaging various communities on the plateau and even Kaduna Nasarawa on afforestation. So we are doing our own little quota. And of course, we are also trying to partner with other young organizations so that we will be able to reach more hands. One of part of what we just started recently with other organization is what we call the Just Go Green or the Go Green Plateau. The idea is actually to plant within the next few months, to plant at least
Yeah.
17,000 trees across the 17
Wow.
local governments. Wow. Yes. So this is just to mention a few. So okay, going back to one of your questions earlier, what was the link between biodiversity and humans?
Mm-hmm.
Of course, it's very, very important to note that we have a lot in common with
Yeah, we do.
our biodiversity and, of course, our wildlife. In fact, in the
Mm.
past, humans have actually learned from wildlife. Uh, if you notice termites alone, termites can teach you a lot of how society can be structured, where we have laborers, workers, and many more. If you hear the word snake, all you ladies will do, of course, is to take flight, right? But
Yeah.
or you look for either a very big stick or wood to kill it, right? But
Mm.
and then if you are asked what is the importance, so what's the importance of snake, if I may ask
I don't think I can answer that now.
you? So you see, but in as much as we know that when they mention snake, it's something dangerous, you discover that snake
Sure.
has its own really unique role it plays in the ecosystem. First of all, snake actually help in handling some of these what do you call it now, rodents. Rodents actually um, um, are actually food to reptiles and snakes. So for example, we have a rat that is carrying Lassa fever. and the snake is able to actually eat it up, what will happen? The snake cannot fall sick with Lassa fever.
Oh wow.
Do you understand?
Wow.
Because it has a system that can actually digest that
Mm.
pathogen, while we humans
Wow.
cannot. Even if a human
Yeah.
eat that snake, at the end of the day,
Mm-hmm.
so somehow we are very, very connected. And if you can remember the
Mm.
food web and the food chain, right?
In
Yes,
biology.
the food, yes, in biology, you discover that like the food chain is actually the linear connection, while the food web is the web or the complex connection we all have in the ecosystem. Um,
Yeah.
First of all, the plants get the energy from the sunlight. They feed some of the animals. One of the animals feed on another animal, on another animal, and then it end up on our in our pots, right? So you discover that we are
Mm-hmm.
all connected, and we are all supposed to live with one another. Um,
Yeah.
you can say, okay, so I enjoy taking bees or the honey rather. So the bees are
Mm-hmm.
actually very, very important. They help in pollination. So imagine if tomorrow we destroy
Yeah.
wildlife
Yeah.
that includes the bee. That
Definitely.
means there is no food for us. There won't be food
Yeah.
for us.
Yeah.
So you also discover that we have, over the years, science and research have actually helped us to understand that, okay, some um, medicine are actually gotten from either plants or animal. So you discover
Yeah.
that the benefits of or the link between human and wildlife is actually very, very massive, and then we can't ignore it. And that is why we must work to protect our wildlife.
Mm.
Some seed, in fact, cannot be digested if
Yeah.
they don't if they don't pass through the ball of elephants. So elephant as it is can also help actually activate some seed, which will later help promote what do you call it now, the afforestation of some places. So you discover that whether we like it or not, the wildlife is very, very important to us in terms of food
Yeah.
and clothing and shelter. Just as we know in our society, some people have their particular niche, they cannot function in another niche. So
Yeah.
also our wildlife is very, very important because they help us in achieving what we call the balance of the ecosystem, because we are all complexly connected to one another.
Mm.
So thank you very much.
Thank you. I certainly learned a lot. Now I know how a snake, is needed in the environment. Thank you so much. And
Okay.
I am very sure that our viewers out there are also learning and getting new information that they never even knew about. So it's a really good opportunity to learn and experience different things, especially when we're talking about the wildlife, because a lot of people do not concern themselves with the wildlife. So thank you so much once again.
Thank you very much.
So now, would you consider wildlife conservation and ecotourism the best fit in preserving our ecosystem? Now, I know you've spoken about wildlife conservation and also ecotourism. So now, looking at the way we can preserve our environment, preserve wildlife, do you think this is what we should be doing, or do you think there are other approaches we should, opt for to preserve the wildlife we currently have?
Yes, and I would say we can also add, but let me break down ecotourism a bit. Ecotourism is really fun and it's lovely. Is an engagement of either an individual or a group of people observing nature through the lens of various lenses, either photography, whatever. You understand?
Mm.
To actually, that is ecotourism. So, and then ecotourism has a lot of benefits. Number one, people will tend to learn more about various species that can be found in a particular domain.
Mm.
And to the government, it can be a very huge source of revenue. So, it's very, very important. So, why, it's like a double win. We are protecting wildlife and then we are making money. So it's
Yeah.
like a two-way, using one stone to kill two birds. Yes. So when we engage in ecotourism, it has a lot of benefit. In fact, because of its importance, the United Nations has a particular arm called the World Tourism Organization, WTO, and of course, they're in charge of promoting such um, things as it regards to tourism and of course biodiversity conservation. So I believe we can do more when we begin to engage in ecotourism. Of course, it means we must have a protected area for this to be able to be achieved. And if you have a protected area, then that means, of course, there is protection of the biodiversity or the wildlife in that location. And then, of course, it means there will be creation of job for the people who will engage in ensuring that this place is in order. Of course, a lot of people who are involved in craft, in making their products, will also benefit from it. Of course, a lot of people will also begin to move in, and of course, we'll be able to even achieve peace because, okay, people who are using places like the forest as hideouts for crime will also be
Mm.
what's evacuated. So there
Yeah.
is multiple benefits, and I believe since it's like using one stone to kill two birds, we should actually engage in ecotourism for wildlife conservation and then, of course, wildlife restoration in our ecosystem.
Mm-hmm. But one thing I'm concerned with is the maintenance of because I know that there are some wildlife conservation. I know that like Yankari Game Reserve and other ones. I'm not sure they're like we have other ones in Nigeria, but what about the maintenance of it? How exactly do you ensure that such places where we are conserving the wildlife, where we can actually express um the ecotourism you spoke about, how do we ensure that they are being maintained where they are?
Okay, the maintenance, as you said, is very, very critical for all of us, and we must work towards ensuring it. And the maintenance of a place is actually supposed to be domiciled with the management. Uh, and if that is seen as one of the key components of any park or any game reserve or any protected area across the country, I believe it will be achieved. But one key thing, like I've always mentioned, is the fact that funding is very, 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 very important.
Yeah.
When you fund uh, a protected area and you fund the ecotourism, and then everybody involved, whether the security, the management, the promoters, uh, and of course, promoting a business or an organization or any entity has to do with the admin, it has to do with security, it has to do with funding, it has to do with all, every component is very, very important. So
Yeah.
if, but it can only function well if it is fed with the funding. Funding is just like the food to any functional pursuit or goal. So, and then the passion. For example, I don't have passion for conservation, and you keep me in conservation, I won't pursue it all
Mm-hmm.
I have. So some people are not supposed to be working in, what do you call it now, in the Ministry of Environment, but they find themselves there because, of course, the connection. So we don't have to mention that. That's another long topic on its own. So people
Yeah.
with passion, good funding, uh, regular monitoring and evaluation, and then action. If someone is placed in a park and he's not performing, of course, he should be removed. If
Mm-hmm.
something is going wrong, of course, he should be sanctioned. So
Mm-hmm.
there is a need for serious sanction. There is also need for uh, arresting and prosecuting all those involved in wildlife crimes, You understand? And then the promotion of all these things are very, 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 very key. And because they are key, we must actually ensure that they are done in the right channel and at the right time. But just like I said, funding, monitoring, and as
Mm-hmm.
well as ensuring that people with passion are
Are
at the
there.
helms of affairs,
Yeah.
yes, must
So
would help us ensure sustainability. But above all, young people's creativity is also key,
mm,
and it must what be
so
infused in
basically,
all this.
one of the roles our governments or private bodies should be looking at is if they want to probably sponsor something or put funds somewhere is wildlife conservation, which I think is very important, and advocacy such as this is very important to people out there so that you know that oh, the wildlife is just as important as any other venture I want to go into,
Yes,
which then
absolutely.
also, yeah. So
Okay, for
this also
example,
brings me to, okay. Okay, please carry on.
okay, no,
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 maybe you
carry
should
on.
go ahead. Okay, it's maybe it may be part of your next question, but let me say it. If, for example, companies are demanded to actually ensure the implementation of their EPR. EPR stands for
Mm-hmm.
Extended Producer Responsibility,
Responsibility.
and that is part of the CSR, corporate social responsibility of any this thing. So when, for example, we're talking about pollution, if, for example, Coca-Cola, Pepsi, all these big brands are part of the key polluters, then what should we do? Of course, they should be also involved in cleaning. Also, they should be
Yeah,
also
definitely.
involved in ecotourism. They should sponsor. They should be involved in sponsoring things that has to do with ecotourism and then wildlife conservation, and then of course habitat protection. So all these things, if can also only be achieved if they on their own are made to ensure that okay they implement their EPRs as regards to
Mm.
pollution and any other aspect. They can, uh, individuals and private bodies or private businesses can also um, key into the ecotourism. One important thing is
Yeah,
that it will also help promote their business and their brands, and they will have the opportunity to also
well,
be involved in conservation. So it's a win-win when you look at it.
and it can also certainly help their ESG because I know that's a new development that a lot of companies are going into. They are investing in that. So if a company like a private body goes into ecotourism or wildlife conservation, it certainly helps them in the long run.
Absolutely.
So, which was so you even answered a part of my next question, which was the role of individuals, private bodies, governmental organizations, and international organizations. So, this one says something about that. What role can they play in wildlife conservation and
Okay.
ecosystem restoration?
Okay, of course, support individuals for the private companies. They can support individuals. More resources should be channeled to the issue of conservation. Right now, we know as it is, we are facing a very, very tough time in when it comes to the issue of just recovery from the COVID-19.
Yeah.
But part of it also means that we have to also um, ensure the restoration of our ecosystem. That no wonder the recent what do you call it now, World Environment Day was actually focused on the restoration of our ecosystem. So international grants and funding should also be well fully channeled to uh, ecosystem and biodiversity conservation and restoration. Because if you look at most of the funding, you discover that we only have little funding for all these kind of things like endangered species. They are really, really hard to come by. And even if they are, if you come by some, you discover that they are very, very hard to assess. And so, what is if you cannot access funding and is available? So, what is the use of the funding? So,
Mm-hmm.
international funding for things like this should be accessible even to NGOs and to individuals so that they can actually be forerunners in ensuring that uh, our biodiversity is actually being protected. To also add to this, civil society must work together to achieve the aim of what wildlife conservation. It's actually a huge um, work. An individual or one single organization cannot solve the problem. So I'm happy we're having this kind of conversation together with Climate Wednesday. It's also trying to what raise awareness that okay, we need to all put our heads together to do more. So individuals can collaborate. Uh, of course, international fundings and organizations can also support small organizations to actually champion uh, biodiversity conservation and wildlife restoration because it's a lot of process. Sometimes a conservation project can take from 2 to 10 years to be able to achieve. So imagine the duration and the number of resources that will be required. When you talk about oil spill, of course, to be able to restore that kind of ecosystem, there will be a lot of investment of time, resources, and many more. And of course, that means a lot
Yeah.
of individuals and organizations must actually put their heads together to be able to achieve that. Well, of course, just like you have
Mm.
mentioned, it's about funding, funding, and funding.
Yeah.
So I believe
Wow.
um, individuals, I believe organization can play a very, very important role to help us achieve this.
Mm-hmm. Definitely they can. And with now, we know the things they can start doing, to help push that sector to the place where it's meant to be. So thank you so much. And because we're coming to the end of, this this conference or this meeting, and it has been exciting so far. And just to wrap it up, I'll be asking you one last question that you'll be answering in 1 minute.
Okay, I'm all yes.
Eh, So, if you could
Bring
make
it
a
on.
1 minute video towards sensitizing people about this, what would you say? For just 1 minute.
Wow, that's really tough. But let me say it this way. Um, Hello, everyone. If I have to tell you much about biodiversity conservation, I would say it's actually very, very important. Somehow a lot is actually on my head right now, and then I'm wondering how I can bring it out. But okay, I will say, okay, biodiversity is very, very important to us. Um, our wildlife is very, very critical to our survival. We must
Mm,
all ensure their survival. Else, we are actually um, saying we don't want our future generation to be the key in tomorrow's solution. So we must all work towards ensuring that our wildlife, which is source to food, medicine, and even income for all of us, are secured. And
mm,
it is not just for one person to do, it's not just for one organization, it is for everyone. And like I always say, it is not for the faint hearted. Things like that has to do with developmental work and is not actually for the faint hearted. We must all join hands and heads together to be able to achieve this. So
Thank you very much, Mr. Benson. It has been an amazing ride so far, and I definitely learned a lot. One of such was that, the impact of snakes to the environment, which was something I never knew before, but it was something that I love to learn about. So thank you so much once again.
So thank you so much, so much, so much. It has been
Yes. So this
a privilege to actually be featured. So super excited.
thank you. Thank you for honoring our invitation.
Oh, thank you. Always my pleasure. So if you
Thank you
guys
so much.
will want us to talk more about pollution and many more, of course, I'm always available.
Thank you too. So to all our viewers, this brings us to the end of this series. And till next week, remain International Climate Change Development Initiative. Have a lovely day ahead.
Yes, thank you very, very much. Bye.